Welcome back live to TNSradio.com. I'm now delighted to let you all know I have my guest, Mike Montagne, founder of People for Mathematically Perfected Economy, live on the line with me here. And I've asked Mike to come on and discuss social credit, the idea behind social credit and why social credit, the idea of social credit, and it's offered basically out there, folks, as an alternative system, and I believe it has intrinsic flaws in there, and Mike does too, I'm sure, and Mike can explain those to us. Mike, can you hear me okay?
Sure, I can hear you perfectly.
Give me 1, 2, 3. Perfect, you're coming through, lovely. Okay, so Mike, if I can just offer the floor up to you to maybe let people know where you're at with the idea behind social credit.
Yeah, in fact, probably none of us would know or hear much about what supposedly is social credit today if social credit was faithful to its original concepts of C.H. Douglas. The reason that I became aware of social credit is its advocates, who were obviously my adversaries in the early 90s, invited me to a social credit forum. William B. Ryan, who presented himself as if he were the moderator for two forums, social credit and A plus B theorem was what the name of the other one was. Both of them are social credit forums. They both referred to C.H. Douglas's work. So in the course of little time, I was showered with the official material of the social credit movement, which is, while it had some surviving remnants from its beginning, it was never a force in any kind of social or monetary reform movement, really, except I would say it had it attracted a certain faction which would come to the social credit arena thirsting for relief from what many people realize, that there is something wrong with this lie that we call economy. So being as social credit at least delves into economics and attempts to identify a problem and to resolve a problem, it's like anything else. If you had a bogus proposition of a solution, so many people who are looking for solutions might visit your forum, your arena, in the course of looking for answers, be members for a while, participate in a while, and eventually leave when or if they figure out that, in fact, the answers aren't there. I was invited to the social credit forums by William B. Ryan, to whom I respond in an infamous essay on our web pages. Search for William B. Ryan at perfecteconomy.com, and you'll read an essay in which William B. Ryan attempts to invalidate my thesis that interest inevitably multiplies falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt. Anyway, so
Hang on, sorry, Mike. How could anybody even attempt to try that? I mean, all people have to do is look outside, look around you. The whole system, I mean, the reason the monetary system is in the condition it's in is precisely because of what you've just said.
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, as I look back, in my life, in 1970, it was obvious to me that interest multiplied debt into terminal sums of falsified debt. The sum of the world's debt was escalating faster than its income increased, both per capita and in total.
Yeah.
1975, it was more evident. By the later 70s, it was so evident that even the so-called financial industry, Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve, had imposed double-digit prime rates upon the Federal Reserve note, which is as a so-called reserve currency. of course, this interest rate precipitated around the world, and debt was multiplying at a phenomenal rate under those higher rates of interest. I mean, all along the way, everywhere around us, all of the evidence indicates that indeed, something is multiplying debt, and whatever multiplies debt but interest, when you have to borrow the same money over and over and over again just to maintain it in circulation because you're paying principal and interest out of circulation and borrowing it back as a new debt equal to the former debt that you resolved plus the interest, you're increasing the sum of debt by interest. So while this is a rather obvious thing, William B. Ryan attempted approximately 1995 to ambush me. He wrote me a friendly, more or less gentlemanly letter inviting me to join both the social credit and the A plus B theorem forums, which I'll explain what these things are in a moment.
Well, am I right in thinking, Mike, that the social credit system, just to give you my little background on where I came across it and how come I knew when I came across MPE, immediately I spotted the difference. I came across it first on it's a website, St. Michael's Journal. They were very religious people. Do you recall that website?
No.
They've been at this since, I think, the early 1920s.
Yeah, social credit has. That's when Douglas dates from, and we should go, I'll go over that a bit to put Douglas into perspective in the course of explaining what social credit was, the environment that it rose up amidst, and,
well, it was after the Depression in America, right? The Depression caused an awful lot of people, I think, to look into this.
Yes, but in 1920 we don't have the Depression, right? We don't have the Depression yet.
No, but I mean, once the Depression came along, this now, the whole, inverted commas, social credit idea after the Depression, that's when it started to get more and more attention.
It got some traction owing to the Depression because Douglas's work had published, the proposition that he had identified a fault in what we call economics. And because the fault was claimed to be identified, it attracted people from the dire condition of suffering, the first Great Depression. To put all that into perspective, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on the eve of December 23rd, 1913. And it's a mere 15 years before it causes the first Great Depression. And I wrote an essay in the mid-75 area that the title of which was Mathematic Proof the Federal Reserve Caused the First Great Depression, which was actually a paper about the fundamental obfuscation of our currency and how it could only engender a finite life cycle in which merely maintaining a vital circulation perpetually multiplied initial sums of falsified debt into inevitably terminal sums of falsified debt we can no longer afford to service, which destroys creditworthiness to borrow further as remains necessary to maintain a vital circulation, which of course destruction of creditworthiness then precipitates in rapid deflation of the circulation in the final stage of a virtual immediate failure. That final stage of failure is presently being staved by artificially introducing massive amounts of currency into circulation in order to make up for the fact that we are paying massive amounts of currency out of circulation. So the device for doing this, which I suggested to the Reagan administration, not as a recommended policy, but in order to prove that it too had a finite lifespan, what I call federal overspending is the very thing that's saving us from a far state than we presently suffer. It's vital that we fix the economy before we arrest federal overspending by returning to fiscal conservancy. But so until we do that, we have to understand what in fact our problems are and what the solution is. Now, social credit has enjoyed some resurgency of popularity. That is, attendance by intellectuals who, in every case, do not understand that it is, in fact, a solution. Worse, it doesn't even identify the problems, and our listeners will understand what I mean in a minute. That's not just simply an arrogant statement.
No.
But Douglas produces this work in the few years which transpire from the 15 years which transpire from the creation of the Federal Reserve in December of 1913 to 1929, when the stock market crashes, which most people wrongly believe is what caused the first Great Depression. The banking system wants us to believe that the stock market crash caused the first Great Depression. The stock market crashed, in fact, because of the multiplication of falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt, compromised creditworthiness for people to borrow further as was necessary to sustain the stock market. That's why the market crashed. And this is what my paper exposed. Mathematic proof the Federal Reserve caused the first Great Depression. So this identifies a cause which is completely at odds with anything that Douglas pretends to have identified. What happened basically that caused the Great Depression is people quit saving because the security markets were increasing in purported value, which equates to cost, of course, at such a rate as far exceeded what returns you could acquire for saving your money. So you put it into the stock market, and the typical policy of the time was that you borrowed money on margin. So this is how this worked on, for example, a 10% margin. If you had 10% of $1,000, you could buy $1,000 worth of stock. So you put up $100 of your own money, you borrowed $900, you bought $1,000 worth of stock, and you might have bought that on a 15-day promissory note. So what happened is you had to pay that note off in 15 days. You had to pay $900. You had $100, but that's gone now. It's been spent on this stock. So now, in 15 days, you'd watch the market, and just day 12, you feel is your sweet spot. You've acquired the most profit for it, and in 12 days, the value of that $1,000 worth of stock went up $100 purportedly. So you sold the stock in 12 days for $1,100. You paid off your $900 debt, and you had $200 in 12 days. So you had doubled your $100 in 12 days. Now, being as this was relatively common practice, no one could afford to put their money into savings. Everyone, quote, invested, unquote, in the stock market, which is not investment at all. It's just a gambling arena.
And
You're
am I right in saying,
investing.
Sorry, am I right in saying that extra $100 of, let's call it, perceived value for them, or even real value, I suppose, at the time, that had to be borrowed into circulation from somebody else to inflate the system to that point anyway?
That's true as well.
Yeah.
But under the rapid industrial expansion that you had, money was being poured into circulation. While the cause or purpose of the further funding may be justified, we have a rapid expansion of the circulation, which equates to a rapid expansion of debt, but that rapid expansion of debt is multiplied, in fact, at an escalating rate itself by the fact that we have to maintain the circulation. So what we're paying out on the circulation on this, you can imagine there's just a phenomenal sum of money that's going out of circulation and has to be borrowed back. And this is not even 15, well, at the time of the securities markets crash in 1929, we're approximately 15 years into the lifespan of the Federal Reserve System, which promised to solve all the problems that it can only cause. So it's in that area of this rapid industrial expansion and
So are you saying, Mike, sorry for interrupting you, are you saying basically the rapid expansion of the industry and the working man didn't notice any of this because all he saw around him was factories going up and lots of work suddenly there was a boom. So the average Joe wasn't going to see that there was an inherent flaw in the system. He wasn't going to recognize it, if you will.
Well, that's not really so. Douglas was thinking about it, and a lot of other people were thinking about it. Basically, what the major banks did in the 20 years or so before, actually since Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, the banking system was causing what we wrongly refer to as recessions. Basically, what we wrongly perceive to be recessions are, in effect, they're banking takeovers of substantial sectors of industry. A given bank, J. Piermont Morgan, for example, might loan a loan, which means publish further representations of the people's own promissory obligations, pretend to loan them to the people as if we have to borrow representations of our own promissory obligations from a bank. Anyway, so it pretends to loan all this money into circulation to finance new industry, subject to interest, of course. So the industry is developed, begins to thrive, further expansion occurs, and then one day out of the blue, Mr. Banker says, I think you've borrowed as much money as we dare lend you. You're at the limits of your creditworthiness. You can't borrow any further. Well, the average Joe, he thinks, I developed my business. I'm a tannery or a shoemaker or clothes maker shop. I've borrowed as much as the bank dare lend me. So he thinks that the bank is right and that he's wrong. They've saturated the limits of their creditworthiness, which is a fact. But the thing is, in order to maintain the circulation that remains necessary to sustain their industry and its ability to continue servicing the debt it's already accumulated, we have to borrow back into circulation what we're paying out of circulation. So when the banker advises...
Yeah, there's no other option.
Pardon me?
There's no other option.
Yeah, there's no other option. So what happens, what's going on is the obfuscation of the currency is what's multiplying debt upon industry beyond industry's means of servicing it. So this forces, the bank, indeed, it can't lend anymore because it won't get it back, but also it has to lend anymore because it can't even collect on its existent debts because the circulation disappears as we pay it out of circulation. And particularly when our creditworthiness is saturated, we're paying it out of circulation in a very short order of time. You see, so what these bankers would do, they would loan all this money, which is just further representations of our own promissory obligations. which we don't need to acquire from banks at all, much less do we ever borrow, because the bank it's just creating this money. We're not borrowing it from the bank.
Sure.
It's doing no more than Benjamin Franklin did when he published the colonial currency of Pennsylvania. He didn't require the principal be paid to him, and he certainly didn't charge interest either then, because he had no property at stake. Neither do the banking systems. So anyway, this obfuscation of our promissory obligations, owing to a mere implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation, forces us to perpetually borrow the interest and principal that we're paying out of circulation back into circulation, with the principal that we borrow back creating a new debt equal to all former debt, which otherwise would be resolved, thus maintaining any former sum of debt and making it mathematically impossible to pay down any former sum of debt, whereas the interest that we pay out of circulation, borrowed back into circulation, comprises new debt, and so the sum of debt increases by ever greater sums of periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. So the sum of debt it increases at even an inherently escalating rate until we suffer this terminal sum of debt. And then the bankers say, well, you've exceeded your creditworthiness. And this is why in this second cycle of the Federal Reserve System and its compatible or sister banking systems around the world, this second life cycle, what they're doing to combat to persist in a state of terminal failure, which is maximal unearned profit to the banking system, is they're pouring the money into circulation to the federal governments of every country of the world. That's where the money is coming from. So coming back into circulation from, that is. So, anyway, what precipitated in the Great Depression was this same multiplication of debt. And here you were, what happened at day 12, you sold your stocks, you got $200 now. So you took your $200, 10% margin, you bought $2,000 worth of stock, you borrowed $1,800. 12 days went by and you did the same thing again. You had $400 now. A few months ago, you had $100, So now you've got $400 and you're buying $4,000 worth of stock. And on day 5, the Federal Reserve banks announce they're not going to loan any more money for short-term speculation on the stock market. What are you forced with? Well, there was $400 in circulation. You don't have it, nor does anybody else who's investing in stock, gambling on the stock market, in other words. And even if they do have it, that $400 can only suffice to pay $400 for the $4,000 worth of stock you have to sell for $4,000 to make your original profit. Now, you might be able to break even at $400 in terms of your losses if you got to keep that, but you got a $3,600 debt. So if you get $400 for your stock, which is all there is in circulation, you're suffering a $3,600 loss in the course of a few days. And you are forced now to sell that stock to recoup whatever you can to a so-called economy, a lie of economy that has $400 to purchase it with. You see, it can happen, but that you go down, and you go down hard and fast in no time at all. So we are the perfect fools of the masters who rule us if we believe without any articulation that the securities crash of 1929 caused the first Great Depression. No, it was the same obfuscation of our currency which precipitated in the same present failure. Well, now, in the time leading up to the creation of the Federal Reserve System, the same banks which become the Federal Reserve were loaning money to industry, under the increasing circulation. New industry thrived until one day the banks would say, well, we've loaned enough, we can't loan you anymore. So when they withheld further credit, which is not really credit, but they refer to it as credit, and we do too. So we'll just, for our sake of comfort, we'll use the term. It's a falsification of debt, what they're calling credit. But anyway, so by withholding credit, they deny us the ability to maintain a vital circulation. So we're paying principal and interest out, unable to borrow any of it back.
Mike, sorry for interrupting you. Can you just explain to people exactly, as best you can, exactly what you mean by that term, vital circulation? I understand what you mean when you say it, but just to be real clear.
Okay, a vital circulation is whatever money you need in circulation. And there's a state of equilibrium between all of these forces under this obfuscation of the currency that is generally reached. We generally don't borrow unless we have to. And so a vital circulation is what we will borrow back into circulation to maintain some generally minimal amount that allows us to sustain our industry and commerce. Yeah. Industry produces, commerce consumes, and trades. And so there's a cycle between industry and commerce. And there's a minimum circulation which is sufficient to sustain the industry and the commerce, which together are necessary to that industry and commerce survive. If either of them suffers below a certain limit, then industry can no longer service the debts that are saddled upon it. And likewise, it can't pay labor, management, and ownership as they require to service the debts which are serviced on the remainder of the private sector. And that minimal amount of circulation is what I'm referring to as a vital circulation. It's usually a minimal amount of circulation under usury because we tend not to borrow or risk in the whole climate of it all more than we have to, because that increases our costs beyond what we have to suffer. But at the same time, that means that we suffer a minimal circulation, which, if it's sufficient to sustain industry and commerce, remains a vital circulation. It's vital because we can't do without it.
Exactly. Okay, in other words, that's what I was going to say to you. So when we lack vital circulation, we're going to see exactly what we're seeing around us now: evictions and business failure, and basically societal collapse.
Yeah, and there's no reverse of that under this obfuscation of our currency, because the only way we can get the circulation back is to borrow further beyond an already terminal sum of debt. We also can't fix things like federal overspending, because that's the only way that any money's coming back into circulation. You see, if we stopped federal overspending, we made every government of the world, we restricted it to spending only what it takes in, okay, and borrowing, therefore, for nothing. What would happen is all the circulation that we have would be filled out in an overnight practically, because we're servicing so much debt. It has to come back in massive amounts. And so, since the private sector has already exceeded the limits to which it can borrow, the only way that we can sustain a circulation is by irresponsibility and the banking system, in order that the private sector doesn't get the idea that maybe we ought to fix all this, is pretending to be tolerant of federal governments all around the world, spending far more than they're taking in, and never even having a hope. It's mathematically impossible to pay down those debts, because merely in maintaining a vital circulation, we have to accumulate further debt. So this is our quagmire, and this is why it's really important to understand social credit, because if it provides an answer, okay, All right, we need to know that. And if it doesn't, then we need to be able to argue ourselves against it. So as a public, capable of self-rule, we resolve what solution is. We hear no more of unfounded ideas, competing propositions, which have no prospect whatsoever of saving us.
Well, can I ask you, did you hear about social credit before you created MPE, or was it the other way around?
Oh, no. I basically resolved what mathematically perfected economy is in a single day in high school. It took a couple of weeks for me to figure out, that everything else that could be wrong with the economy other than the first categoric fault that I give is inflation and deflation, and the last is inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of falsified debt by interest. I mean, the solution of those two categoric faults were immediate. Oh. In my rhetorical answer or question to my teacher's assertion that circulatory inflation causes price inflation, I basically prescribed mathematically perfected economy. I mean, the very first thought, was that the solution of inflation and deflation is strictly to maintain a circulation which is always equal to represented property. And you immediately realize that there's one and one only way to do that. And that, so, that answer was, 16-year-old, advanced math students, answer to a simple question. And it's never been refuted since. William B. Ryan of Social Credit attempts to invalidate it. That was 1968.
Can we get to that? So basically, his attempted invalidation. Can we even explore what? If I were to ask you to explain what he is trying to demonstrate, what would you say? Now, be nice. Be nice.
You have to read it to believe what's going on here. And I should segue into that. If we want to go there, I'll have to spend a moment and do a little search. Maybe you can do it and text it to me, and I'll bring up the page and read William B. Ryan's attempt to invalidate my thesis that interest multiplies debt and falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt by the very mechanism that we've just discussed. But let's put Douglas into perspective. We had in the early 1900s, before the Federal Reserve, and the late 1800s, since Lincoln's assassination, we had the banking sector imposing all these false, entirely artificial monetary collapses through their obfuscation of the currency, claiming we exceeded our creditworthiness, withdrawing further falsification of credit so that the circulation would collapse. And what happens? Well, shoot, if you loaned money for a textile industry to be developed on a 20-year note, and 2 years into it, you could say, well, you've exceeded your creditworthiness, and to every other industry that was related to that, and all of which industries were interdependent upon each other. You could say, well, you've all exceeded your creditworthiness. You guys are stagnating. We hope for better growth. You're not meeting our expectations. We don't dare loan you any more money unless you improve your performance. Well, it's impossible. Because more and more of the circulation is becoming dedicated to servicing debt, leaving less and less to sustain the industry and commerce, which are required to do so, So they made this happen, but they pretend, of course, that, oh, we don't know, it's you, and we're so stupid that we say, oh, yeah, it's us. We're at fault here. And we are at fault because we refuse to understand these things. It's more work to, read a few web pages.
You got to get stuck in. You got to spark up the brain, and you got to get fired up, and you got to work it out, folks. But the people need to do it, folks.
Yeah, well,
I think they are. I think they're beginning to, Mike.
Well, I run into an awful lot of people that are. It's incredible. I can hardly speak. I was just down in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. They're doing a documentary on mathematically perfected economy. And I mean, they had 12 panelists, none of whom were even worth hearing a single word. The first fellow was dressed in a top hat and tails, and he rapped for 30 minutes all the things we already know, as if he was entertaining us. If you had a tomato, you'd have had to throw it at the guy. This is all aired live on a radio station from Los Angeles. The last guy to speak before I spoke for sang terribly, I might admit, sang about economy for 20 minutes. And then they forgot to have me speak at all because everybody else ran over their allotted time. The host began to conclude the program. I was sitting right next to him on his left side. I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, Henry, I think you forgot to have one of your speakers speak. And he apologized very clumsily, introduced me, mispronouncing my word, claiming I'm an economist, and handed over the floor to me. I first explained that I'm not an economist, in the sense of the word. And I turned to all the other, panelists and explained to them in 2 or 3 sentences that none of their objects would ever be met until all of us understood that we redundantly suffer a terminal obfuscation of our currency, which can only multiply falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt, which is the very problem everywhere around us. And this was held in a huge library in a former bank building, and I no sooner said just that much, and all these people who had come to the library, or not a library, a bookstore called the Last Bookstore in Los Angeles, people came out of every aisle into the center of the building where the audience was seated. The security people left the door. The cashiers left their cash registers. And I explained in just a few words that it's impossible even to maintain a vital circulation without perpetually borrowing interest and principal back into circulation as an ever greater sum, an inevitably terminal sum of falsified debt to mere publishers of further representations of our promissory obligations. There was a homeless black woman. I mean, everyone, wanted me to go on and on and on. And they had to shut the program down because it had exceeded its time limit. I don't run into people who don't understand this. I mean, we see our detractors on the internet. We have these people that, think that their idea is somehow more important, or they don't like your attitude or the way that you, present the issue or whatever, and we have people who attack us, constantly. But, aside from that, I generally, everywhere I go, I don't run into people who don't understand.
I have been promoting MPE for a long time now, on TNS radio. And of course I see all these guys online, Mike, and they all seem to fall into the so-called category of troll because none of them actually provide an actual argument about, that they could reasonably claim somehow invalidates MPE. They always try to sidestep and sidesteer and twist and bend. They never deal with the substantive issues.
Well, that's exactly what William B. Ryan resorts to in this article that we'll come around to here. So let's get back to what social credit is and whether it should have any sway. I mean, we're the gentlemen in this, and somebody has to put some sense to it. And truth of the matter is, most people not wanting to do their homework, which is a terrible thing. We ourselves are at fault for, the things we're suffering because, it's easier to jump in front of a train on the railroad tracks than it is to, to 4 months earlier have sat down in front of the computer and studied a single web page and get those principles and realize, holy shit, I've been wrong my whole life. Very
one of the reasons I was delighted that you agreed to come on tonight was because a while back at the Waterford, there was a meeting, a presentation that we were all doing down in Waterford, and there was a chap who was due to come. I don't think he didn't show up, but he was there to promote social credit, you see. And I was kind of hoping he'd come there because I wanted to have a chat with him to see if I could explain MPE to him and to see if I could explain to him why social credit it's just not going to operate. It's not going to work. It can't work. But it looks, if you don't look into it too deeply, Mike, you could be forgiven for getting a warm, fuzzy feeling about it if you're not really going to think about the issues, folks. You see, it sounds...
I think that's probably so, but I really don't think there's much of an excuse for it still, because I've been around for a long time, and if you were even a diligent student of social credit, any kind of student, not just a diligent student, any kind of student of social credit, you would find an incredible disparity in what so-called social credit advocates are advocating now and social credit. They're two completely different things. And the change transpires after I'm invited to the social credit forums, approximately 1995, and invited by the same William B. Ryan to introduce myself and explain my theses of inevitable failure and singular solution in one and one only mathematically perfected economy, which is simply a restoration of the universal right to issue unexploited promissory obligations subject to an obligatory schedule of payment in which we pay the principal, and the principal is retired from circulation at the rate of consumption of the related property, which long-standing proof of which has never been invalidated in 45 years. So I visited the social credit forums. I was writing software at the time, and I didn't have time to take it up immediately. In a week or two down the road, I finally got around to, a space where I could maybe break from my work for a bit and engage in these forums. So I subscribed to both forums and introduced myself as I was instructed, and gave the Simple Simon version of my thesis of inevitable failure as a consequence of maintaining a vital circulation subject to this obfuscation of our currency, and of singular solution, which restores our right to issue unexploited promissory obligations subject to an obligatory schedule of payment, which solves all of the category faults by maintaining a perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just that much for the remaining value of represented property. So these are simple, indisputable mathematic facts. No credible forum or audience would even dare dispute them. As if you define inflation and deflation respectively as increases or decreases in a circulation per goods and services or represented property or whatever, then there's one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, and that is to maintain a circulation which is always equal to the remaining value of represented property. And indeed, there's only one way to accomplish that, and I just gave it. You see, it's that simple. It's second-grade math.
I've just sent you something there in the Skype chat box, Mike. One, there was a question from JP on the site, and also can you see that paragraph I sent you there? I've copied that from awakenedmovementireland.com, and I believe that's...
well, that's asleep. Banks create money out of thin air as loans. That's borrowing from my work, but changing it right away. Banks do not create money out of thin air.
No.
They create money out of your promissory obligations. And unless we understand that, we will never understand that there's a singular solution. All they're doing is publishing the money and pretending we have to borrow it from them, which itself enriches them to the extent. I had an argument with a banker last night, an inebriated banker who's been in banking for 37 years and claims to be one of the top financial people in the world. And they wanted to say, do you know what this kind of a trust is and that kind of a trust is and then some other kind of instrument? And these are all instruments of value. And I said, only if they're enforceable and enforced. And by enforceable, I mean that the obfuscation of the currency allows leeway that out of our possible production in commerce, we can fulfill the requisites of whatever the agreement are. And she's looking at me like, you're talking above me. I don't even understand what you mean. Well, you've had 37 years in the industry and you're claiming no one could know anything about banking who hasn't worked in it. And so she goes on to all these tangents, throwing this and that and the other thing out there. And the whole while I'm just saying calmly, says, do you know how banks create money? And she'd look at me every time I said that, and she'd go off rattling off all this other bullshit. And I'd say, do you know how banks create money? And she goes on all this other bullshit about all these licenses she has and has to maintain thousands of dollars a year to be one of the top people in the world in the financial industry. And I said, but do you know how banks create money? She finally stopped long enough. And I said, you've got a PhD and a master's and you claim to have all this education and have done this for 37 years. You can't tell me how banks create money? And she just had this dumb look on her face. I said, well, that's where it all starts. How do banks create money? She just had this dumb blank look on her face. And then I explained it to her. And she looked at my other half and said, he sounds intelligent, but I can't understand how he makes any sense at all, So to make a long story short, we went round and round and round and round, all this evasion until finally she agrees with me, but she doesn't have the slightest idea what I was saying, And this person has aged far more than the years that have transpired since I last saw them. I mean, they're a wreck, an alcoholic, and it's like, for crying out loud, you could see everything wrong written all over them. Now, that's not your typical audience. They know better. They're not going to push my button because I don't bend for bankers. I don't care how many of them there are or whatever, I just bowl through the room. It's just taking no prisoners. It's just how it is. It's a war.
Can we just get to that actual, paragraph that I've put in your Skype? I put it into the chat box as well for the guys to see.
Well, banking is a scam. Do you know that no one said, this is what some of the trolls would attack me for. Banking is a scam. That is such a dilution of the facts we have to master. Well, it's seemingly obvious now. There's only one thing that establishes that banking is a scam. And you do not find that anywhere in history until my work.
Correct. That's the point I'm trying to make, because social credit, for him to start off with that phrase, banking is a scam,
this is the same guy?
This was from Cathal Spellman, you see, the chap who was coming supposed This is the point I'm trying to make to you. He was the chap who was supposed to come down.
He's not even authority.
No.
Here's the real
point I'm trying to make though is, right, but the point I'm trying to make though is, you see, he was the guy who was supposed to be coming down. I don't know the guy from a bar of soap. Maybe he's a very nice guy. Maybe he was misled. Maybe he hasn't fully worked it out. I don't know. But he was supposed to be coming to Waterford to do the talk, you see. which is why I went. That's actually the real reason I really went to Waterford, folks.
So you wasted a day.
No, well, we did other things, which were very well worthwhile. But even that expression, if somebody says to me, banking is a scam, I immediately ask them for their invalidation, because their invalidation is actually going to validate and prove MPE, right?
Well, it would if they could even articulate it.
If they can articulate it.
But see, this is what I mean when I say these people are they have stolen my work. And this is why this story between William B. Ryan and all the social credit advocates and myself, of whom are many prominent names you recognize, like Dick Eastman, Tom Kennedy, all these. Tom Kennedy has been selling my Parable of Perfect Economy since 1996 or 7 as if it was an account of history.
Yeah.
It's an essay, and it's fictional, in which I issue my own words to the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. And Tom Kennedy of the social credit movement has been selling my essay, rewritten in his own words, as if it was an account of history that his research discovered. That's how phony all these people are. But here's the other disparity is banking is a scam. Excuse me. That doesn't even belong in Douglas's work. Douglas wasn't against banking.
Correct.
Douglas didn't identify an obfuscation of our currency. He settled for something far short of that. And understanding that is very important. And if this guy was really going to represent social credit, this is what he would have argued for.
Well, the claim that social credit is interest-free money. You see, that's the one that...
No, that idea comes from my work.
I know, but
and
that was the one... it
comes from this very... in fact, a perfect example of the social credit position, even just a few years ago, is William B. Ryan's essay against me. Right. He's denying that interest has any problem at all. It's entirely justified and undamaging.
Well, you see, it was that expression.
It's only because that I wrote an essay in response to that, which you can just look up William B. Ryan, R-Y-A-N,
yep,
on Google.
In fact, I'll get a link. I'll get a link for the folks.
Yeah. In fact, you can even look it up by searching it at perfecteconomy. Just go to any page at perfecteconomy.com and then do a find for Ryan, R-Y-A-N, and you'll find the link for the page.
I've already posted
post
that
it
link
back to me, and I'll even read and discuss the
I've already posted that link into the chat. Actually, I posted that into the chat box quite some time ago. But that expression, social credit is interest-free money, you see, that was the jaw.
Oh, that's bullshit.
That's what I'm saying. That was the jaw.
That's stealing perfect economy.
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
the moment my jaw
These
dropped
people were
open.
all against that until not only were they against it, when I entered that forum, I spent 15 minutes writing a post to each forum outlining this idea in a perfectly credible way, which from its beginning, if it was issued amongst credible people, I still hold to this very moment, to my dying day, that it would have had great interest. Well, now it's taken over there, okay? But what happened immediately was the opposite. I was deluged. I got a dozen angry emails. And you have to understand that there'll be certain overlapping members in social credit and Austrian economics because they're not mutually exclusive camps. They're not even really ideas. They're not formally demonstrable ideas. And
no.
we should understand
just for the record, Mike. I think just for the record, I should read that paragraph just so it's read aloud into the record here tonight for the podcast. I just want to read this out.
Okay, I haven't got past the second sentence.
I know. Let me just read the whole thing just so people know what's being addressed. Social credit, and it follows. Banking is a scam. Banks create money out of thin air as loans. Loans must be repaid plus interest. The interest is never created. There is never enough money to repay all loans plus non-existent interest. The result is chaos, misery, and poverty in the midst of plenty. Then the claim comes in. Social credit is interest-free money created as required by a national credit office. This money is to be issued to households who will distribute it by their spending. Social credit means freedom from banker manipulation, freedom from debt slavery, and real lasting prosperity. Cathal Spellman talks on how to create a social credit currency for immediate use in Ireland. So the first thing I want to do, Mike, if Cathal Spellman wishes to call in, if he's listening, or if he wants to make a follow-up, he's more than welcome, okay? The right to reply, Mike. I just want to offer that out there and make sure that, you'd be very...
I offered that just for the record also.
Right.
I offered that before we went on the air in the minute that we were talking there, because I invite in debate, but obviously, and I'm saying this as I would to his very face if he was sitting in the room here with me, obviously he's no student of social credit. Because the very fact of the matter is, what Douglas was about was this. C.H. Douglas, in the midst of these artificial failures that had been imposed by this obfuscation of the currency, which I see no evidence that he's able to articulate even here. In the midst of this, Douglas realizes that something is wrong, and he goes on an intellectual quest for it. And to make a long story short, I would never have been interested in this material if I was browsing the library and I picked up a half a dozen books by C.H. Douglas. I don't think he wrote so many, but if I did, if I opened them at any point, at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the end, saw what they started with, where they were headed, how they put it together, and where they were going with it, I would never even have checked a book out from the library. But amidst all this controversy which erupts upon my initial joining of these forums, I get immediately, within 15 minutes, I get a dozen angry emails back. Who do I think I am applying mathematics to economy? Don't I, the Austrian,
I'm sorry, well, I always find that
don't I realize
funny.
that economics involves indeterminate human behavior, therefore you can't apply mathematics to economics? Well, there's no greater nonsense.
No, that's the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah.
But there's very few actual advocates, pretended advocate. This guy is a pretended advocate. He is not advocating social credit. He's advocating a bastardization of mathematically perfected economy without even articulating the reasons, the causes of the problems which we have to resolve. Banks don't create money out of thin air. And I never say that except to repeat it as someone else is saying. It's so foreign to someone who would discover what's wrong with banking to summarize it in such a preposterous way. To claim that the interest doesn't exist. So he's read Ellen Hodgson Brown, who's also a plagiarist of my work. Well, what does she say? Because the interest doesn't exist. And that's where Roger Hayes got that idea from. And I assassinated Roger with that preposterous idea. They don't have to create any more money. You see, the same whatever $1 trillion of circulation can exist, and we can pay $500 billion out of circulation, this quarter and borrow it back as new debt increased by so much as periodic interest. Because the whole while the interest existed, it's the same money coming back into circulation. There isn't any problem that the interest doesn't exist. The problem is that in order to maintain a vital circulation, we have to borrow back into circulation what we're paying out of it to the possession of bankers. It's It's not in our possession. It can't sustain industry and commerce. It has to come back. And the banks don't give it away, and they don't have that many things to spend it on. So we have to borrow it back into circulation. So principal comes back as new debt equal to the old, and interest comes back as further debt above the old, with the sum of falsified debt to banking, therefore, perpetually increasing by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. And I haven't run into the social creditor who can even articulate that. In fact, Paul Green-Known, who's an infamous producer of the video Money is Debt, he's another social creditor, and he claims debt's the problem. How do you deduce that debt's the problem out of all that?
Well, that's one of the things I've been maintaining here on TNS, saying to people, look, you can't have a monetary system of any description unless you have the idea of debt in there. Because if you're going to do something for me...
The money is even redeemable, and it's not redeemable unless its redeemability can be enforced.
Correct.
So if the money is even redeemable, it will be a debt. But after all, what are these debts but promissory obligations to pay the principal to the real creditor who gives up property for the promissory obligation? The real creditor is the guy who builds the house that you bought the house from. The bank just comes into the equation and prints the money, claiming it's a debt to the bank then, you see, enriching the bank to every house that the house builder produces.
Well, I've been on a lot of building sites in my time, Mike, and I've built a lot of houses. I never once, just for the record, folks, I never once saw a banker beside me.
Yeah.
Never once.
Well, we all know that. But what is social credit? Let's get back to this.
Yeah.
So Douglas is looking for the problem. I found the problem because my teacher, teaching economics, the lie of economics, which is the antithesis of economics, an obfuscation of our currency, which can only multiply falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt. The teacher, and I come up with that idea in answer to the proposition. My teacher teaches us that he says, today I'm going to teach you about inflation and deflation. This is about 2 weeks into this course. And inflation and deflation he defines respectively as increases or decreases in circulation per goods and in the volume of circulation per goods and services. And I'd already been thinking about that, and I thought it was a wacky idea that you could even suffer circulatory inflation. And yet, in the very next sentence, unlike math, there's no proofs of any of these assertions. It's merely, insinuation, assertion, claim. His very next sentence goes on to claim that circulatory inflation causes price inflation. That is, an increase in circulation per goods and services causes prices to go up. And I'm thinking, well, because I go to the grocery store when I'm 5 years old on my bicycle and I got 2 pennies today, and a price of a piece of licorice was, you got 2 pieces of licorice for a penny back then. And I usually have a penny that would justify me riding my bike all the way to the, the little grocery market to get a couple of pieces of licorice, I got 2 pennies today. So when I walk in the door, does the store owner say, hey, he's got 2 pennies today. Hey, Mike, the price of licorice went up, so take your 2 pieces and go. Then what would I do? I'd smarten up and, only go to the store with a penny at a time, Well, anyways, it's a preposterous idea because, of course, if twice the money exists, they can buy twice the houses from you, the builder of the house. So what do? Do you increase your price of the house by 2, so you're only building one house for twice the money? No. This isn't how regular commerce works. It's just a purported principle, a false one, of course, of banking and economy. But anyway, my teacher no sooner says that, circulatory inflation causes price inflation, and I just had enough, I was an A+ student and college algebra, in the second grade, and I'm 16 years old and I can prove the Pythagorean theorem off the top of my head. It's like, excuse me, this crap isn't flying here. And I asked politely, I says, he recognized me and I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Otto, but I just can't believe that could possibly be true.
How many people, though, Mike, have sat through countless lectures in economics, universities, been taught economics? I keep coming back to this.
I ran into one last night.
How come they're not seeing it? I'm a relatively simple guy. I like my math, logic, and reason. And I've tried to talk to some of these guys. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. I get further with the average Joe. And I've sent emails to a lot of these guys, Mike, in these so-called economists in universities, asking, like, look, will you come on to TNS Radio? And when you just explain to people exactly how come why you're telling everybody that this system that you're, offering or supporting, how it's even possible for it to work. It can't work. And they won't come.
Well, more and more of them are coming around too, and I get news of professors all over the world who crossed my work and realize it's correct or advocating, some kind of watered down version of it, but they typically do this as if it were their own idea, and they're a really smart guy, smarter than the rest of us, and that's a hugely destructive thing too, because it's not their original ideas. In every case, I see that, they can't even articulate the principles. Sooner or later, and usually very soon, and whatever material they issue, whether it be verbal or written, they expose the fact that they had to have got it from somewhere else because they don't even understand it. They more or less mindly recite it, which is, in many cases, all that what we call teaching.
Are they afraid to, Mike? Do you think, is there a fear? Is there an inherent fear in them because they know there's something wrong and they just fear looking down that avenue? Do you think that's...
Well, in some cases that's true. They've dedicated their life to that as their profession. When it goes away, and it will go away, it will absolutely go away. We will. One day humanity will eradicate banking forever. If not, because it's perhaps the most preposterous lie that inept society after inept society has ever itself simply believed.
If I were to ask you, Mike, who do you think where does the blame lie? Who's responsible for perpetuating this? Is this a headless blunder that's perpetuating, or do you think there's a positive force pushing this?
I see in every case that it's the people at fault. We are to blame. Let's just take this character, for example.
Do you mean we, the people, are to blame because we're continually going along with it, or
who's heard a watered down idea? Okay. So approximately 15 years after it was introduced to the social credit forums, and now social credit is my work, a terribly diluted, bastardized, corrupted, erroneous assertion of my ideas. Money's not created out of thin air. Banking is a scam is to avoid any explanation of it at all. The whole scam is the obfuscation of the currency, which I've given, I don't know how many tens and tens of thousands of times in 45 years, without contest. And when you say banking is a scam, what kind of expert does it make you? You're claiming to utter something which is, let's say, blatantly obvious. Everyone should understand that banking is a scam. What scam is it? Ellen Hodgson Brown called it a Ponzi scheme. How is it a Ponzi scheme?
It doesn't fit. I find that so irritating when people use that. I understand why people use it, but it really bugs me. I mean, every time I hear somebody say, "Oh, it's a Ponzi scheme," I stop and I go, "Wait a minute. Okay, let's look up what a Ponzi scheme is, and now look at what banking is, and now do you see that they're not the same thing?" And eventually you kind of, oh yeah, now they see it. But I understand why people use it. They hear it.
I always challenge a person when they say that money's created out of thin air, or they say that banking is a Ponzi scheme. I challenge them immediately.
Yeah.
And there isn't a person on this earth who can justify either statement or even give it a proper root somewhere, because neither are true, neither are even relevant. Banking creates money out of thin air. Come on. Ron Paul running for president claiming banks create money out of thin air, complaining about how much money they're created. And he's refused to debate me since 1980, when even his close friends have apprised him of mathematically perfected economy, that it explains all this, Ron, and you need to learn about it. I've had one of Ron Paul's close friends explain to me that, when Ron got interested in Austrian economics was approximately 1975. He jumped in feet first, didn't understand a thing, just began to recite its stupid dogma, and he's never understood it. He's never understood anything further since. That's as far as he's ever going to go. And if you examine the math of the situation and then put what Ron Paul wants to do into effect, you can easily model what the consequences of Ron Paul or Austrian economics would be.
Well, does this come into play here? This is something Alan Sovman put on the chat box there. It's a quotation from the Rothschild brothers of London in 1863. The few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favours that there will be no opposition from that class. Is that where it's at? Oh,
I've got over 500 quotes on my pages.
I know, but that one that was poignant. I thought that was important.
Yeah, they're all poignant, and I guess they're more. I'm sorry. I'm sort of tired of throwing those words out there. There's more poignant statement might be, Well,
I meant just from the perpetuation of the system. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and I've stood in front of many a room of people and said, it's not the banker's fault, folks. Did anybody hold a gun to your head when you went in and you signed that document?
Well, we have no choice, unless we master the issues and realize we have a choice and that we have, an indefeatable basis for unity if we merely achieve the modest stature of capability to govern ourselves justly. We don't even know what to stand for. Social credit, let me finally tell you what social credit is. So, through all this, many words, all of which, you wade through and you go, what the hell is this guy trying to put together? And finally it comes down to it. And I know this because, my first emails to each of these two forums, the A plus B theorem forum, discusses basically the math of Douglas's theory. And the social credit forum is basically supposedly faithful to Douglas's ideas.
Well, what's this A plus B? Can you give people an understanding what the A plus B theorem is?
Well, what the idea of Douglas is he wanders around, and he cites obvious problems, increasing prices, minimal wages and whatnot, and he thinks, what can be wrong here? And he ultimately comes up with this idea. And you watch your chat room and see if it comes alive here to this. But he comes up with this idea that this is the problem. Because the wages of labor are insufficient to purchase the production of industry, therefore, labor requires a perpetual compensation for the difference, which he then goes on to calculate with his A plus B theorem. So think about that a minute. He says, this is what his work resolves to, is that he's claiming that because the wages of labor are insufficient to purchase the production of industry, that is, the production of labor, therefore, labor, that is under economics, as we know it, which was this form of British banker capitalism imposed upon the United States as everywhere else in the world.
Uh-huh.
And so he's saying because the wages of labor are inadequate to purchase the production of industry, therefore labor requires and deserves perpetual compensation, which of course comes from government, hence the name social credit. So that's what social credit means.
So is he basically saying there that, well, I mean...
you work at the shoe factory and I work at the shoe factory and we're the only two workers. And every unit of time we produce S number of shoes.
Sure.
All right?
No, I get it. I mean...
and our wages are S divided by something, you know. Our sum of our wages is S, something less than S.
You work for $100 a week and you produce...
Therefore, we get the difference between S and our wages, W, appropriated to us from government, of course, perpetually, so that we can afford to purchase the shoes that we produce.
Well, here's the question I'd put to you, Mike. I mean, I looked at the social credit thing, and exactly the A plus B. I mean, I understand that. I mean, you know, I like me logic, reason, maths, and I looked at it and I went, okay. So, I mean, I see the point, but the point he's making, not you, the point he's making, or that's offered, if you will, in social credit. Again, it's to appeal to the base level man or woman that doesn't really think these things through. You see, if I say to the average Joe, look, you work in a factory, as you said, Mike, you produce so many pairs of shoes a week, and at the end of that week, the very production you cannot purchase with what your remuneration package is. Therefore, where's the profit going to? Well, that's going to the corporation, supposedly, because supposedly, well, they provided the job for you. However, that's parasitic. And
okay, so you're actually going down the exact same path that pretty close to the exact same path as I took in response to these people who attacked me for giving the real problem and its only solution.
Uh-huh.
In the only terms from which you can understand it. Well, they're such zealots to protect their own idea that they attack you on largely a personal
Correct,
level.
and I was attacked, you're right.
Innuendo, name-calling, preposterous denial that you can use mathematics to resolve mathematic issues. After all, if inflation and deflation are defined as increases or decreases in the volume of circulation per goods and services, excuse me, that's a mathematic definition, and therefore inflation and deflation have a mathematic solution, and one only solution only, which is to maintain a circulation which is always equal to the remaining value of represented property. So these are, no reasonable person would dispute any of these things.
The problem is, though, the reasonable person, Mike, see, this is the problem. Where are all the reasonable people? Where did they go? They used to be there. They were out there. I knew them in the past, but, we're losing them. We're losing the reasonable person.
Reason will have to return to us, and we will have to return to reason, or we will suffer the consequences, which is a far worse monetary failure than we have so far endured.
Well, the New World Order,
mathematic fact of the matter.
The New World Order wet dream is an unthinking population, folks. I'm addressing the audience here, Mike. It's an unthinking, blindly following orders population, who will fear when they're told to fear, and who will love when they're told to love, and who will do what they're told when they're told. And they will believe whatever they're told. That's what That's what's in your future if you don't pay attention.
None of which are the right thing to do.
No, but this is why I try to say to people, MPE is so vital to the future of humanity. Even if you never get involved in it, even if you live on an island somewhere, and let's say you don't have to interact with anybody ever, but see if you don't understand it, your children will be doomed. You've got to understand this, people.
Forever. And,
absolutely.
And, unless they wake up. But,
look, Mike, I don't know if you know this. I mean, I have said to you in the past, but I mean, to me, okay, and I'm not trying to, blow smoke at you here, as they say, but to me, you are one of you're one of my intellectual heroes, because you have been an adherent to this and you have pushed it out for year after year after year, and you have never varied your course.
I've never said anything different from the beginning to the end. I never spoke up until I had the truth. And in truth, you're hearing the words of a 16-year-old boy out the body of a 60-year-old.
No, but look, I mean, as I said, look, I'm not trying to embarrass you here, but I mean, to me, what you have offered and what you've presented to the world, and he has, folks. Mike Montagne has presented this to the world. It's a gift. It's an intellectual gift. Please accept it. I'm begging.
It's free. The trademarks and the copyrights are all about protecting, of course, the truth from the plagiarists.
Yeah, that's the source. The idea.
None of whom have I sued, and excuse me.
Know. In fact, I've been very tempted. I've been very tempted to challenge.
I know, and I have too. When I think about, there's people dying all over the world, and all these,
people are
things that we don't have to suffer. We're suffering, and
would you agree,
the hardship,
Mike? People are dying for lack of this knowledge. That's why this is why there are wars on the planet, folks. It's all to do with money. We know that, Mike. It's all to do with the financial system that's in place, because the rich, evil people, I mean, I know there are rich, good people. They exist. But there are also rich, evil people, or are rich, uncaring people, or rich, psychopathic people. And they discovered they could make even more money by selling guns and bullets. And, to keep selling them, well, that means people have to keep killing each other.
Right.
It's that simple.
But let's get back to social credit here, because if we understand that, then everyone is going to, be able to rest in peace over this issue. These guys just attacked me, and I mean viciously. In another 15 minutes, I had another 50 angry emails from more people, And an hour later, I've got another 100, And this went on literally for 2 weeks. And I answered to every question, even multiple times. And I addressed every issue, and I studied social credit thoroughly in the process of doing that, because people in the forums who weren't posting against me, or weren't posting at all pretty much, were nonetheless emailing me on the side, encouraging me to keep it up, that these guys were all wrong, that they knew it all the time, and now they finally were seeing the light, and just to keep on going. And so they sent me Douglas's material, converted to PDFs, all the research that I could ever have needed. I didn't look for one piece. It all landed on my lap, and I used the very material of this group against the group itself. Well, I didn't even know what social credit was. And to this day, I do not care what social credit is, because it offers us nothing. It is preposterous.
No, but we got to be able to explain to people why. See, that's what
that's what I'm getting at.
Go ahead.
I always give why.
Yes.
That's the only way that I communicate, which is what, some people don't want to hear today. They want to hear 3 seconds and that's it. And so that's why we are the way we are, because our 3 seconds isn't good enough. So, anyway, so when I pour through over this material and I discover that this is Douglas's proposition, that government should just create money and issue it to the labor class to make up for the difference between labor's earnings and the value of their production, I'm thinking, holy crap. I mean, what a stupid solution. Yeah, you might be equaling things out, but is that even the problem? So let's just go through what the process of critical thinking would be. Is that even the problem? Well, of course not. Why? Because it's the income of labor, management, and ownership, which is available to purchase the production of industry, and they are already equals. So the first critical thought that you answer to leads you to a fact that this isn't the problem, therefore it can't be the solution either. But then, if the income of industry equals the value of its production, and the spendings of labor, management, and ownership are insufficient to purchase the farmer production of industry, what is happening? Or if there's some other anomaly or impropriety which makes it impossible to produce as much, which my teacher was claiming would have caused the increase in prices, what is that cause? And what is it? The only way to find fundamental cause is to start from wherever you are out in the branches of the tree and follow the leaves to the first twigs and get to the first branch and where it merges with further branches until you get to the trunk, and you go all the way down to the bottom of the root. And until you've done that, you don't know what the cause is. You don't know what the cause is. So the most expeditious process of any critical thinker to discover the root is to start at the root. And what do you do if you start at the root? You say, okay, banking loans us money. Really? Well, if it's loaning it from its own possession, then all this money already existed, so they're never creating it. That can't be true. So they are creating money. Oh, they're creating money. And what are they giving up for this money? That it's their legitimate possession, that it should become a debt to the bank. Nothing.
Not a thing.
So we already discovered the problem. But then let's work. Bank can just publish further representations of our promissory obligations and maybe absorb a half of a penny per bill, regardless of denomination and cost, and then launder that bill into its unwarranted possession when we pay the principal. That's its first crime, because the principal wasn't owed to the bank. Yes, it has to be paid out of circulation, but then it was a promissory obligation. What is a promissory obligation? Indeed, it represents value, but it only represents value until it's fulfilled. So the principal has to be retired from circulation. It is not the property of a bank, nor does it represent the property or entitlement of anyone once it's been fulfilled. And this is why you folks have to sit down and do a little bit of studying, because that's a little bit too much information to get in one sitting. If you didn't get it in one sitting, you wouldn't realize that the whole iceberg is there from the tip of the iceberg. So you'd wander off as if you know, and like Winston Churchill said, many people discover the truth, but most just pick themselves up and wander off as if nothing had happened. And that's our problem, because there would not be a banker in the world if the people understood their plight. So the next thing that we evaluate is, okay, so their first crime is they're laundering all the principal that's ever created into their unwarranted, illegitimate possession. What a humongous crime that is itself. And the ramifications of that in terms of circulatory inflation, on the, retirement phase of the life cycle of the currency are itself phenomenally destructive to our every purpose, But then to impose interest upon these falsified debts as if there was even property at stake, when the only thing at stake is the negligible cost of publishing physical money in the few cases that physical money is published. Holy cripe. So then they multiply all these debts 3, 4, 2, whatever times over. That's enough of a crime against us. But holy crap. If we think about that, how do we even continue to service the initial debts of the system? We're paying principal and interest to the banking system. They don't absorb this much of our production. How much of you are rendering all your production to the bank for your income? None. So all that money's coming back into circulation by being borrowed somewhere, right? So you're borrowing principal back as new debt equal to the old, making it mathematically impossible to pay down the sum of debt. And therefore, you're borrowing principal back into circulation as new debt, perpetually increasing the sum of falsified debt by so much as ever greater sums of periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt until you suffer the present terminal failure. It took 15 years in the first lifespan of the Federal Reserve System. And this time it's taken longer because more moderate rates of interest have been imposed, because more industrial expansion has transpired, even against the fact that the system is restrictive to that, but the same consequence is inevitable because you cannot outgrow an escalation of debt forever. Eventually it outstrips you. And once you get to the critical phase, you're done. That's it. When interest rates have been lowered to minimums, and the outstanding rates that the middlemen have to charge for their purported necessary profits, therefore impose some rate upon the circulation, which is above zero, you have a rate of interest which is multiplying phenomenal sums of debt by phenomenal sums of periodic interest, just to maintain a relatively tiny circulation, with the sum of debt increasing still by those phenomenal sums of interest until, governments in such deep doo-doo that many years after the private sector can no longer afford to sustain a vital circulation, we go belly up all together at the same time. And there's no protection for the wealthy. There's no protection for the vanished middle class. And there's even less protection for the poor. And this is what you've wrought if you sat on your hindquarters and didn't master, you got the whole story right here in one radio program. What else do you need?
Exactly. Well, look, Mike, I often, we come across stories here. People, every now and again, they put, look, this rich guy has had his mansion taken off him. Ha, ha, ha. And I say, no. That's not the way to look at it. That's not the way to look at it. It's, I feel just as sorry for a rich guy who's had his mansion taken off him as I do for a poor guy who had his shack taken off him.
Oh yeah, just because somebody is wealthy doesn't mean they're a bastard, but the wealthiest are those who are tied to the central bank. You could also applaud when a bank goes down. No. Oh, I don't. This is another thing that people, I know you don't, Ben, but yeah. The other thing is that, we have to distinguish between banks. It's the central bank that's publishing all the money. Yes. The intermediate banks that interface with the people, commerce, and industry, are purportedly borrowing that money from the central bank. That's why they go down. If a bank goes down, that isn't good for us because it's bad for the bad guys. Well, they might be the bad guys, but they're not the real bad guy. The bad guy is the central bank.
Would you agree?
They will never go down.
Would you agree, Mike, that every time, would you agree that every time a bank in your country, folks, let's say you're in a smallish, medium country, just, like Ireland, every time a bank goes down, folks, you're getting one step nearer to the IMF coming in. And when the IMF come in, like, the IMF, the so-called International Monetary Fund, when the IMF come in, by the time those guys knock on your door, all they want is exclusive rights to all your assets, your minerals, your fishing, your trees, your forests, your crops, the national herd.
And if you don't give them to them, they're going to sell them to China anyway.
Yeah, and on top of that, once the IMF come in, folks, have a look across the internet there. Have a look at some countries. Do some research. Look at the countries the IMF came into, and then have a look and see how long it took before they turned into war-torn nightmares. And then you'll see what I'm talking about with the IMF.
At best, all they can do is keep you on the brink of terminal failure by ensuring that you are appropriated further loans at perhaps diminished rates of interest above and beyond your already exceeded limits of creditworthiness.
Yeah.
They're just pouring money into circulation when, that particular government can't borrow anymore because they're a worse risk than other governments. Of course, the banks aren't really complaining about these things. You would think if you'd loaned all the money in existence, very little of it is still in existence, in circulation, that is, and yet you had loaned all that into circulation, ostensibly justifying interest, counting on a multiple of it returning to you, and it was mathematically impossible. Well, theoretically, then, all the intermediate banks should be jumping down, protesting like hell as well. Why aren't they then? Well, there's a very obvious reason. But think about it. Why aren't they? Because all that money that's poured into circulation just comes right back to them.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've often done mini demonstrations, Mike, up at the meetup, basic stuff and basic, when I'm out and about doing the talks and whatever. I try to cover an awful lot of material, and I like to do little demonstrations to people to show them, just simple stuff. But what I'm trying to do is just leave folks with a question. I'm not trying to give them the solution in that regard. I say, I want to leave you with the question. Now here's the link, Mathematically Perfected Economy. Now you've got the question. Go bloody look. Go look. We need to, folks, I don't think you understand how important this is. I mean, this to me is, it's fundamentally important to your life and to your children's life. And
there's no question about it. And
it's absolute.
Fact, it's not a matter of opinion. You said
No.
this to me.
No, it's not.
It's not a matter of opinion even. It's a matter of absolute fact, because this obfuscation, as you're seeing, I mean, if you heard this little spiel 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago, what's happened every day since is debt has escalated at an escalating rate. And yes, the models I provided the Reagan administration calculated this maximum possible lifespan of this system, and even the rate at which interest rates had to be reduced to realize that maximum possible lifespan. And in 1983 and 4, the numbers that you can still download and run in my models projected the system would fail at approximately 2010 AD. It's just a mathematic fact. You can take a monopoly board, sit down, divvy out all the money according to the rules of the game, only it's all borrowed, and pay it back on interest, and you watch how long you can play the game.
Absolutely.
There's a maximum point. It will fail. Why? Because you're going to pay whatever 1/5 of your funds, your solubility out of circulation to the banking system, but you require it. If you're going to excel at the game, you have to have it back. If you're even going to persist in the game, you have to have it back. So you borrow it back into circulation at further interest, and what happened? Everything that you just paid out of circulation came back as a new debt. Some of it counted toward principal, and some of it counted toward interest. And what counted toward interest just increased your debt. Just put a piece of paper on your table and go through the steps of it with a monopoly board, and you'll be amazed how quickly the game ends. Just do the math and apply generic rates of interest to it. You'll be surprised how soon the game ends, and nobody has any money to play the game any longer.
Can you explain to people, Mike, what you were doing over the last, few months? As you know, people are kind of wondering, hey, where was Mike Montagne? Where did he disappear to from TNS? Can you just explain to folks what you were up to?
I've been doing rehab. No.
Financial rehab. I think people thought we'd fallen out or something like that, you know.
Well, I'm busier with it, you know, I mean, literally every waking hour of my life is, you know, saturated with more to do for this cause than I have hours to give to it. So I've been working since early this morning, before I took a call on a very important matter.
Well, I don't know whether you want to tell.
A foundation is being set. It was offered just in the last few hours.
Right.
Foundation was offered to be set up to support mathematically perfected economy forever. For the last several months, a person offered, and I would gladly mention his name. He deserves all our gratitude. But my time, I didn't have enough time to devote to finishing this website that we're building, to host a worldwide constitutional amendment for every country of the world for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. I know you've probably been saying, because haven't been in the loop so much, you're so busy with the things that you're doing, but the amendment is finished. It has been for a long while. A person offered to pay for one of the top programmers in the tool set and development language that we're using for this new website to help me finish the work. So I'm busy working with a software engineer from Russia all day, every day, at every spare moment that I have. Writing code. I've got usually at least 3 editors open at every moment. I do right now 7 terminal windows, browser, code base, literally hundreds and hundreds of source files, and we're developing a website that hopefully will be able to sustain viral signatures to this worldwide mandate for mathematically perfected economy, which would establish mathematically perfected economy everywhere in the world. Another thing that is going on is the content of the entire site, although there's some 200 articles on my present pages at perfecteconomy.com. These will be moved to another domain, perfectedeconomy.org, which is not up yet. It's not ready for public view. But the new site will be hosted there. And, I'm not apologizing. The material on the existing pages at perfecteconomy.com is not even organized intentionally to teach people. I was on the road when I rewrote my entire site. I had, during the 2008 election, we had one of our people from Poland had joined the Ron Paul campaign, and it got close enough to people who could promise things that they basically promised that Ron Paul would meet with me and engage in serious discussion on mathematically perfected economy. He failed ever to do that. I tore my existing site down, which I had modified completely to potentially support Ron Paul at that time. And while I was on the road, away from my research material and formal articles, I gleaned what I could and threw it together in response, or in the wake of, that travesty. So, largely the site responds to political conditions, which are largely known to the perpetrators at the time. I basically, the homepage takes Ron Paul out. It may seem to be impertinent, but, anyone who's adept and wants to understand.
I think it's essential.
They're willing to negotiate that material and still glean from it all the things that it still teaches. And the new site, all that's been reorganized into an order that a visitor can basically read 3 pages, 2 of which are simple, one of which I read live on TNS radio, whatever it was, 6 or 9 months ago, Parable of Perfect Economy, and with a full addendum explaining what the story teaches. So 2 brief articles in that one, which is a little longer, but it's a very enjoyable read. And it's a historic example of what caused all these changes. People have to understand that, what this guy has posted here about social credit isn't even social credit. What happened is, I argued with these people for 2 weeks, took more vicious personal attacks than anyone, ought to ever endure. And the William B. Ryan article that you can read is a perfect example of it. It's preposterous denigration without a meritable, element in the whole of it. And I had quite a few people on this side who were rooting me on, feeding me with the group's own information, giving me the green light to blast away. And I just basically annihilated everything in a matter of 2 weeks. And we still had the people who kept shouting, "Who do you think you are that you could apply mathematics to economics of all things?" And I finally told them all to take a long walk on a short pier. So here, that was 1995, 96 in there. And here we are, 15, 16, 17 years later. And what are they doing? They're pretending my ideas were their own. Yeah. No one in the monetary reform movement didn't even really exist in the early 90s. I was the only.
No, you were it. It was you. End of. It was you.
I was it. And everyone stole all of my articles. Parable of Perfect Economy has been, the last time I counted was a few years ago, but, I found 2,425,000 plagiarizations of that story on the internet. It's not even history, and everyone who plagiarizes it presents it as if their research discovered it in history. It's an essay that I wrote to issue my words through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. That's how preposterous all these people. So this guy has a lot of gall to claim that these objects, which were introduced by my work and theses, are now the objects of social credit. Quote C.H. Douglas and prove any concurrence in those assertions at all. I mean, Douglas doesn't even touch upon interest. Doesn't even touch upon it. If he mentions it, the mentionings are themselves scant as scant gets, but there isn't a hint that he'd ever, uncovered an obfuscation of the currency, nor is there such a hint in, any other material that you'll really discover. I mean, I have had people sending me this stuff, profusely for 20 times as long as most of these people have even considered themselves wrongly as monetary reformists. You're not a reformist when economy has already been perfected and you are degrading that.
And when you've been informed and you've been told and it's been explained to you in minute detail exactly why, and which you have done time and time and time again, folks. Mike has contacted all these people. He's sent it to them all. You've sent it to how many administrations now?
Every sitting president since and including Gerald Ford.
Which is a span
And I can call the White House and the Obama administration won't even talk to me.
And I mean,
that's because
how many
they know
people
who
can
I
tell you
am.
that, folks?
Now, do you think that that's because they actually have a solution?
No, they don't. Of course not.
It's because they're there to preserve banking.
Okay, but just to get back to the actual question that I asked you, what the point I was trying to make
What was that?
Yeah, I think people were wondering, where the hell did Mike Montagne go? Did Vin and Mike have a falling out or a bust up? And I'd like to reassure everybody, no,
you and I will never have a falling out.
No, me and Mike.
No,
are good friends,
I had a problem with a few of your listeners.
Sure.
It's your website. I still hear from a number of people about those listeners. They've actually been proven to be quite the imposters. They hope they're, advocates of something, but they haven't come up with anything. They were nothing but detractors.
Yeah. Well, I don't really want to get too much into that, if you don't mind. But
okay, that's okay.
Because I think who you're referring to is now gone.
What is the solution for all that?
Right. Well, what I'm saying is who you're referring to is now gone. So they're no longer a part of TNS Radio. Who you're referring to there, I think, is no longer part of TNS Radio. It took a bit of time and whatnot, but however, that's gone, done and dusted. But what I wanted to say was, one, Mike was on TNS Radio here for, actually, how long were you on TNS?
Well, pretty close to about a year.
About a year.
Yeah, I did like 50 programs.
Yeah, that's about a year. So, the information given is, I think it's the highest level information on economy that you're ever likely to hear, ever. Absolutely, hands down. And Mike, I just want people to know that Mike and I are buddies. We've not had a bust up.
Well, you and I will always be buddies.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll talk into the small hours on all sorts of topics. Not just, in fact, we rarely talk about economy when it's just you and I. We shoot the breeze on all sorts of things. But I think folks are wondering. I don't know if you want to mention the documentary, do you?
Actually, yeah, well, I could just say a few things about it.
If you don't mind, please.
There's a group in, there's sort of, independent, producers, scattered around the country, one of whom, is located in Los Angeles. And, they had done, I don't know what it was, a year or so ago, they done a documentary on the latest Nobel laureate in economics, and one of the fellow producers contacted me years ago wanting to do a documentary, and for one reason or another, both of us being too busy, didn't pursue our correspondence, as ambitiously as is required often to follow through on a project like this. So anyway, several months ago, he wrote me another email. I hadn't heard from him for whatever it was, 2 years, and revived the proposition. And was actually, it was very much like your and my first discussion,
Oh.
Where, I was very pleased to hear how perfectly articulate this gentleman was already in mathematically perfected economy. He knew it inside and out. He's really good with it. And he has genuine interest in promoting it. So he insisted in flying me down to Los Angeles, and we spent a week documenting mathematically perfected economy. We sort of expected to, not necessarily script anything out, but do a few notes. I was down there a couple hours, and they realized from the very beginning that they needed to have me mic'd up at all times and the cameras rolling. So basically we spent about 15 hours a day for 7 days with 2 cameras and numerous microphones. And even when we weren't filming, I was wearing a portable mic, incredible fidelity. I couldn't believe it. $3,500 lapel mic, that if you play it to their sound system, you can't believe that you're not hearing the person speak. I mean, the fidelity and the cleanness of the sound is unbelievable. But so anyway, we've got a tremendous amount of material. There's a crew that's working full time on, spinning it off into various implementations. So the way we ended up working was, we'd start to discuss what we wanted to do, and the discussion would immediately get so profound that we recorded all the discussion of what we wanted to do. And in many cases, that will be finished material. It was much like the Beatles working, but we had a number of technical people and a couple of cameras and an interviewer. For the first day, at the beginning of the second day, I said I was a little bit uncomfortable about the layout of our discussions, and we were on sort of an L-shaped couch, and I was facing hard to the left to discuss, and I just felt a little contrived and unnatural. I says, the kind of interviews I like to see, something like Brett Favre in whatever kind of clothes he wears, sitting in front of a camera, and the camera just taking it in and showing the guy as he is. I says, I just don't like looking off to the side like this and kind of reciting questions as we do. I said, let's just put a chair in the middle of the room, and I'll sit in the chair, put the chair up backwards or whatever, how I feel like sitting, and look into the camera, and you can stand behind the camera or get in a picture somehow or whatever, but, just get me dead on and, do this. So anyway, we ended up spending days and days and days filming like this, and with technical guys, and we got so much more material than they even hoped for, that they're going to the computer stores and rating them for boxes of multi-terabyte hard drives.
So when are we expecting something production-wise? Any ideas?
I really don't know. When I think about the logistics of it, I think it's going to take a while. These are quality people, but one of them, for instance, just finished. About the third day, I participated in a radio forum that I was mentioning, and they brought on another cameraman who just finished a multi-million-dollar contract for Walt Disney, and he just did a fabulous job of getting right in the middle of the audience and the discussion panel, and just getting right in the face kind of photography that was just great. So he did a really great job of that. We've got all these guys who are working on this now. If you take 2 cameras times 7 days times, let's just say they got 10 hours of film a day, you're talking, 140 hours just to watch it one time, to start putting markers on the beginnings and endings of segments that you might use
that's
for
a hell of a
something.
task.
And, there's just a tremendous amount of work in this. And these guys do, every frame.
But these guys, Mike, these guys are professionals. They know what they're doing with all this. Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
Yeah. They're top.
They're not Walt Disney.
No, but they're top of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the kind of guy that tomorrow could be a major name, Francis Ford Coppola. You would never known, that this guy, rose to fame by whatever he did, filming Woodstock, whatever it was, that's what kind of people these guys were. We got along great. Instant friends with the whole group. You should have seen the cameraman when they had to cut me off at this, when I spoke at this, in the first session of this discussion that was aired live on the radio. The whole audience practically rioted. There was a guy that wanted to kill the guy running to the show. And, people started asking questions. And you should have seen it. It was practically a riot. But just from a couple of days of visiting, the camera crew, the sound people had so mastered mathematically perfected economy that these guys are like leaving their cameras and going out in the middle of the audience. And this was some of the best action of the whole thing, is these guys who are brand new to mathematically perfected economy explaining with these people exactly what they have to understand. It was like, it was a thing of beauty, and I don't know how much of that would ever have been captured yet, because, and they don't know, they haven't even been able to tell me yet, because it was the very cameramen going out in the audience to wage war wherever necessary, to teach people, to take up the cause. I mean, it was really quite awesome. So we don't even know how many pieces we'll have. Some of the things that we recorded were intended to be, let's just talk about inflation, or just tell about the obfuscation of the currency again. Let's just do one short thing about that. All right. So, the camera's rolling while I get the question and I answer the question. The whole thing's basically it's
So were you just kind of coming off the cuff with this?
Oh, entirely.
Wow, fantastic. I can't wait to see it. Just, if you don't mind, Mike, I need to play a tune for biological reasons. We've been talking here nonstop for about 2.5 hours almost, and I need to pay a visit somewhere. If you don't mind, I'm just going to play this. Welcome back to TNSradio.com. I'm still joined live by the wonderful Mike Montagne from, Mike, why don't you please let people know your website?
Perfecteconomy.com. If anyone wants to download my old TNS archives, we've got most of the 50 online for a free download at perfectedeconomy.org/FTP, and you'll be able to negotiate the FTP directory there and find them.
Please do, folks. And when you download them, save them to your computer, burn them to disks if necessary, and pass them out to your friends. Pass them to anybody in finance, in economics. Pass them out and say, here, listen to this.
I don't, I'm fine with challenging the financial people, but the challenge is there. They can't meet it. We've got court cases all over the world already started. There isn't the least argument that they have in defense of our assertion of this obfuscation of the currency. Banks don't have a chance of surviving the onslaught of an informed public.
Not a chance.
Who ought to be enraged by this crime against us. Now, I've never been an alarmist, and we do need to act immediately. We likewise need to do anything and everything that we do peacefully.
Absolutely.
And, refrain from riots, destroying property, the right ideas have to prevail, and the only climb that right ideas can prevail, which is one of peace and lucid interaction between each other. So,
which that kind of leads us perfectly to the mandate, Mike, which is where I was going to go next.
Uh-huh.
Would you like to explain to people how the mandate operates?
Yes, it's sort of a further expansion of any prior initiative of human rights, which established new standards itself. For example, the Declaration of Independence, that is the United States Declaration of Independence, is drafted largely by Thomas Jefferson with the editorial skills and input of John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, was an innovative document, and at least it's exemplary of a number of innovative documents of the time, which hold the King of England accountable for crimes against the people and declare his what amounts to the equivalent of modern evasion evidence. It declares it evidence that our only remaining course is separation. And that's really the significance of that document. We have a number of further documents, and one of my own favorite principles, if you will, I'll scroll to it here really quickly if I can so that I read it properly. It's a quote of John Locke, which we're displaying on our new site. He says, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away or to destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience. And this is largely the principle of this constitutional amendment that basically I've engineered over 40 years as a result of strategizing what the only way to get this done is. We're faced with governments which serve the bankers, which are installed by the banking system to perpetuate banking, the crimes against us. And so unless the people retake the reins of power, we will never have monetary justice, and we will have all the consequences of the present forms of exploitation and abuse of power. So what this document does is it throws a card on the table that I've been holding to my chest that, all these imitators can't articulate a proof of inevitable failure, of this obfuscation of the currency, of singular solution. So the document is a public proof of these crimes. It proves that money has only one civil purpose that any intelligent society would want of it, and that is immutable representation of entitlement in our affairs between each other.
Absolutely.
So it proves that banking is an entirely unwarranted and unassented, which of course is a historical fact, an unassented entity which imposes itself upon us for the purpose of exploitation, the means of which happen to be terminal. So it's a proof of inevitable terminal failure that we, like as was declared in the Declaration of Independence, that we have no recourse whatsoever but to establish mathematically perfected economy immediately, and we are giving our government a deadline, which is December 21st of this year, to have accomplished every purpose declared in this mandate, which is larger than the United States Constitution itself, and that reduced from, I don't know what it is, 7,500, 10,000 words now, but it was at least 3, 4, 5 times that big at different times during its drafting. So it's actually a very, very dense document, which in signing this, we're declaring our rights as sovereign individuals. to mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation, which of course is something that we define in the document.
Yes.
The concept of sovereignty is not akin to all these claims of all these purported sovereign movements. So that's not to be confused with, whatever else anyone else might use the word for. It's explicitly used as an explicit definition of a state of the individual, which is their only rightful state, free of any crime against them. And this is basically a reversion of all government to its only rightful form then. We require that all law be resubjected to standards. Every law has to state its objects. It has to prove that those objects are common to all people and necessary. It has to state and prove its means are the ideal means of it and perfectly just means of accomplishing those objects. And all the while, it's no law can ever be imposed upon the people which has not passed their assent and periodic reassents. So no law is permanent. No injustice can be permanently imposed upon us. We revert the banking systems to mathematically perfected economy by calling a timeout. No one services their debts, any debt that arises in the so-called financial system. We use the money in our accounts for the meanwhile. We still pay our bills. We still work at our jobs, except we're not paying our mortgage. And our mortgage is revised under this amendment of the people to its only rightful state, the only rightful state of a promissory obligation. Which, because the banking system, because none of these are debts to the banking system, and because all payments of principal should be retired from circulation, count all payments of interest instead toward, because the banking system neither has any property at stake as ostensibly justifies interest. The amendment counts all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, which itself resolves most of the world's debt. Very little debt will remain. Then the remaining schedule of payments on any remaining debts, if any, are revised to the rate of consumption of the related property over the remaining lifespan of the property, which basically means that a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan, the payments are revised from something like $1,000 per month under the present system to $83.33 a month under mathematically perfected economy. The difference is a disparity of approximately 12 to 1. Moreover, because that's the rate of payment, you divide the lifespan into the value, so 100 years of life into $100,000 of value makes it $1,000 a year, which you divide 12 into to come up with $83.33 a month on a home that would cost you about $1,000 a month under the present system. And since the rate of payment is at a linear rate, which isn't what we're advocating, but it is representative of the overall picture, because you're paying under the present system at approximately 12 times the warranted rate. That means that of all the remaining debts, the payments will be reduced to approximately 1/12 what they are now, making us across the board at least 12 times as solvent. Moreover, because the rate of payment was 12 times as high, it's basically 12 times into the future from the beginning point that you've paid up to already against such property, including what interest has been applied not toward principal. It's been applied to principal. So, for example, then not only does that reduce your payments to about 1/12 they are if you have any debt remaining, it means that, say, for instance, you'd paid 5 years against such a home under the present system. That would equate to 60 years of payment under this conversion to mathematically perfected economy, which means not only are your payments reduced from $1,000 a month to $83 a month, it's 55 years into the future before you even have to resume a payment because you paid that far into the future. So this mandate explains all this and proves these are the facts. As I've been well assured by a number of legal people now, no court in its right mind would decide in favor of the bankers. There are people, of course, who are already imitating this. We could name names.
Sure.
Don't need to go there, but
no.
To detriment of our causes because they're claiming, for instance, that no debt exists, and that's not true. We're revising our debts to their only rightful state. And it's very important that people don't go out and imitate us in such a sloppy fashion because in the closeness to our arguments that they've entirely borrowed and come to the wrong conclusion that there is no debt whatsoever, they are setting a precedent by which the courts will reject every argument thereafter. So it's very important that we do not underestimate what damage these people are causing this effort by imitating it. But this is what we're doing, and this new website, which will be hosted at perfectedeconomy.org, will sustain signatures to the mandate. A person signs the mandate, and then they go and they submit rights claimant forms if they so desire to apprise their bank, for instance, that they are taking this action in and of their own volition and citing the sections of the mandate which make this person, any person who denies you your right to mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation as a sovereign individual, it makes them guilty of treason and culpable, responsible for their damages to you. So if, for instance, your loan agent insisted you continue to make payments against your house, they become responsible to refund those to you and to compensate you for any consequential damages as a result of that. If your home is repossessed, you cite these arguments, you submit these forms against these people, you take one down to the sheriff and say, this is what I'm doing and these are the reasons why, and a lot of other people are going to be doing this if you haven't heard from them already. So you might visit these web pages and read these arguments because they're not trivial and they will stand up in court.
Absolutely.
And so we're requiring that you uphold the law of the people, and we're holding you accountable for doing otherwise likewise. So you would take another rights claimant form down to your county court and you would submit it there, and notifying the judge ahead of time that if the bank processes any claim against you, and he honors it, upholds an eviction, for example, he's personally responsible because he has been informed that he will be held personally responsible. So we're putting all the criminals in their rightful place, and instead of ruining our lives, we'll be ruining them by restoring justice on this.
Well, they'll be ruining their own lives if they fail to accept this obvious, logical resolution to the process. I mean, it's a logical.
That's another way of saying the same thing, but
yeah.
I don't soft pedal the idea that they're criminals so long as they sustain the criminal purported laws which have enforced banking upon us all this while.
Absolutely. Mike, the future. What's the future hold? Is there a chance we'll ever get you back onto TNS, perhaps?
Well, actually,
because you're missed. I mean, I do get a lot of people saying, "Hey, when the hell is Mike Montagne coming back?"
I still hear from you really do have some great people, and in fact, it's many people from TNS who are working closely, with me now on a daily basis. I mean, what you started there, and I still hear from people regularly, that doing radio with TNS was the greatest thing I ever did. Finally heard my voice. They finally put the picture together. I'd love to be on. At the worst, we discussed this. You even offered to. I'm just mentioning this because credit is due where credit is due. But you even offered to host a radio station. I don't have time to produce one now. I think we're going to probably do one from our domain, and of course, more than anything, I would be pleased as pleased could be that TNS be whatever material we put out, you'd be, of course, not only free and welcome, but I would have great gratitude if you would continue to broadcast it. In a way, it's weird because, a lot of people will say now, well, you basically given all the arguments, what else is there to say?
I think there's plenty more to say.
Yeah, there's other ways to say the same things that have already been said too,
Mike, I have pretty much put out the same show every Sunday since I started doing TNS. I mean, I say the same thing every week, pretty much. As you say, slightly different direction, different perspective. But I mean, I have consistently been saying the same thing from the word go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important because the intent is what matters. The presentation, the attitude, the idea that's coming out from, I like to think from me and from you and all the guys on TNS is, we're not just, I know it says at the top, seeking solutions, but let's face it, we found the solutions. We know the solutions. We're just trying to share them openly and honestly to everyone.
And it's also true about you that if we're plausible that we discover a flaw in a purported solution, you'd be the first to point us all at plugging the hole.
Yeah.
Fixing it. It's a totally honest and genuine effort, which is a distinguishing attribute. People don't think in their silly common way that, it's possible for us to perfect economy. And, it's actually one of the silliest ideas you can ever imagine because, if you ask somebody to say, well, what's all the problems in economy? There are certain people that would say, oh, banks this and Congress that and federal government this and state government that and all those things are bad economy. But if you trace them all out, it comes down to the obfuscation of the currency. You have to get to the root. And in truth, and I'm not praising myself for this, but if there's anything brilliant about this at all, it is not the plain and simple math that we teach, children in elementary school. It's the only thing that is perhaps brilliant, but it's absolutely indispensable to any diligent work. So it's really a matter of mere customary approach to work. But the only way that you can resolve the problems, being as they seem to be of relatively infinite number, is to realize that if you trace these things to the root, each of those things is a different manifestation of only one or of two things, or both of two things. And the only dimensions of money in a circulation is the volume and the disposition. What actually happens with it is the disposition, and the volume is how much there is. That's the only things that there are to money. And in perfecting an economic system, all you're really doing is making sure that there's a volume of representation to represent anything. And the only place that a lacking volume ever exists is in the lack of possession of representation, which means that you need to issue a promissory obligation, and the only fulfillment of that justifies it is a contribution to the overall pool of wealth in such a way that the real creditor can redeem their evidence of entitlement from the overall pool of wealth. And that's, in truth, all there is to perfecting economy. Much of what we discuss that people want to say, oh, that's too complicated. Well, God damn it. If you can't even listen carefully enough to get the problem, there it goes. Why even pretend you give a damn? Because you don't. You know, giving a damn means caring enough to get to the bottom of it. And the bottom isn't far enough away that it's challenging to people. And, you know, I mean, I could have lost my patience with society a long, long time ago and just bailed on this whole thing. It's just that despite how stupid it is and how ridiculous it is, that they don't dive into it immediately and immediately master it. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people do, but, you know, that anyone just mulls around or fidgets on the couch and thinks, whatever, you know, is amazing. Because to fidget on the couch, you're paying, you know, 3 lifetimes of work for 1 lifetime of work under an obfuscation of the currency, which will deprive you of the product of all the work in the end.
And eventually you end up...
and even the opportunity to earn it. So,
exactly.
You know,
eventually you end up with no couch, right? I mean, you end up with no couch. Mike, we've come to the end for tonight. I want to play a tune to finish off. I really, really genuinely cannot thank you enough. I really can't. And
well, you're always welcome, Ben, and no real thanks is necessary, but I always do appreciate your thanks because, you know, I'm sorry that anyone might think that there was some kind of falling out between us, but I mean, it's literally impossible. It's been that way since our first discussion, because from the first moments of our first discussion, I realized that you were a very wise man, and you were educating me as I was educating you, and you endeavored to find the root of all this, is why we even discovered each other. So it's largely to your credit.
Wow, I send it all straight back to you. I'm going to finish now tonight, folks. As I said, I can't thank Mike Montagne enough. You've been listening to tnsradio.ning.com. Please spread the word. Please download this podcast, and I'll make sure you get a high quality copy as well, Mike. Please download it, folks. Spread it. Educate people. Share. Everything will be okay. We can do it. Iwa, agus colas off.